There was only one question about centering prayer, and I thought we'd start with that one, and then we'd move into the false self and then into the general questions. How does that sound to you? Okay. So our first question is, can you can you stress enough the importance of the support group on a weekly basis? How important is it to go on a weekly basis to your centering prayer group?
Yes. Are you going to answer it, or shall I? I thought you
Well,
were going to answer the questions.
no, I'm not answering them. I'm
Oh,
asking them.
oh,
You're answering.
oh.
I'm asking them on behalf of the audience.
Well, I think it is important to attend a centering prayer group if it's within range, reasonable range of your capacities on a once-a-week basis for the first few years at least. Now, some groups differ among themselves, and some will stay together for a long time, and some groups have been together for 15 or more years. Sometimes you can't always stay together because the group gets too big, and certainly after 15 or so, you have to think of moving or dividing. But the advantage of and importance of it in the beginning is that it provides a support group that is really quite important. If you don't have a group, you forget, or you don't have any accountability. Attending a group, you begin to feel like, apart from some other necessity, you are supporting each other, which you are. And you feel a certain accountability to the others that helps to persevere in doing it privately. Obviously, normally the group meets once a week. But if you don't meet for a while, then you don't have an opportunity to hear how the others are doing if you have a period of sharing or of learning something new from the experience of others, or of sharing a book or the tapes. My hope was that people would suffer through the first 31 hours of tapes. Obviously, that would take some time, especially if you divide them in half. That's 62 hours. But my thought was, you don't have to do it every week look at the tapes. You could also, if you sort of leisurely and reflectively go through the tapes, it is a fairly thorough course in the Christian contemplative journey. And it's a course that is placed in dialogue with developmental psychology that is, at least until recently, hasn't been done very much in times past. And also with some sympathy for other contemplative traditions and other religions. So it's meant to provide a base or a gradual introduction to the spiritual journey with a broad base, so that at some point the group can decide what they would like to look at next. Or you keep track of what's happening throughout the Contemplative Outreach Network, and you might find something else that you might like to do, either in addition or eventually in place of. Now, the difficulty arises after a certain number of years. You've seen all the tapes, hopefully a couple of times, and you want to know what's next. Okay. And so you may feel that you would want to either join another group that is similarly advancing and looking for new material and so on, or you might just decide that you do better by yourself. So really, it's not a question of, certainly not a question of obligation, except insofar as a moral sense of sharing develops, where you want to share what you've learned and want to learn what your brothers and sisters have learned. At some point, you may want to just meet to pray. Some groups do different things. You might introduce Lectio. Lectio has been quite popular in our groups, chiefly because Roman Catholics never read the Bible until recently. So it's new to them. This might not apply to more biblical traditions, but so they keep reading, and they got a lot out of that they might not have ever done privately, because it's only recent, since Vatican II, that the church authorities have encouraged reading the Bible. Previously, I thought they might not have liked the translations, or I don't know. But they've changed their minds, often without acknowledging that they have. So anyway, the circumstances may arise where you can't do it. We estimate, and it's a very rough estimate, that maybe half the people doing centering prayer are in a group. So that means that it's just as normal not to be into a group. But the issue is, those who are not in a group, what is nourishing them? Well, they have the books and so on, but they don't have the interaction of the group or the friendship of others who are on the journey, and perhaps a spiritual companion and so on. So there are many variables and many reasons that recommend it, but also reasons that dispense one from remaining, forever in a group. Though there are some admirable groups that have almost become a religious community. They've been together 20 years. And they want to discuss issues that beginners don't. So this is one issue about whether you bring new people into an established group. On the positive side, it means that the newcomers have the benefit of the experience of the older people. But the older ones will sometimes hesitate to bring up personal issues for fear they might frighten the newcomers away, because there are a few difficulties that arise. And so they don't have quite the spontaneity to share the basic issues that they're interested in. So in every chapter, it's a good idea, if there are other opportunities where people can join groups that want to talk about the same advancing experiences, some of which I talked about this afternoon. Now, for many of you, you may have been bored to tears by what I said, because you don't have any exposure to those particular levels yet. But those who do might wish to have had the opportunity to discuss it in greater depth, some issues. So it's hard to make an absolute definitive statement, but on the whole, for those just beginning, the best. There are exceptions, but as far as we have, based on experience, what seems to work best is to go through the introduction, the 6 weeks of follow-up, perhaps longer, to learn a few other supportive teachings like the welcoming prayer, forgiveness prayer, especially Lectio Divina, so that it's kind of like a novitiate in a religious order. There's certain basic instructions that everybody gets, and then when they make their commitment to do the prayer forever or longer, then it's based on a certain experience and wisdom, and then I think you can do what you want. And the group has to decide whether to take new members or not, depending on where you are. Now, there's one group I know, several actually, been together so long, they'd love to take new people in, but what they want to talk about is quite different from what beginners need. So the only reason really to take them in would be to serve as novice masters, so to speak, and introduce these people to what they have shared. And they don't really want to do that. They don't feel called to that particular ministry, but hopefully there's some groups who do. But if you do introduce new people, it would be good to be sure that some of your senior members or those who are qualified could be a mentor to them for at least a year, because a newcomer in a new group is not likely to bring up everything that's on their mind, because they might think, if they know I'm having distractions in prayer, they'll throw me out. They have funny ideas. And so perhaps that's enough of discussion of the various aspects. Perhaps you could want to say something.
Yeah, I would agree that I think that beginners are very supported by a group, and I would encourage anyone who begins centering prayer to attend the support groups. And often they get they become a really Christian contemplative community where everyone is really happy to be together because they're like-minded and they like to be with people that are studying the same thing they are and practicing the same prayer that they are, because they don't usually find that in their place of work or at home. So it's a place to go and be with other people who really are doing the same, have the same kind of love of God and the deep spirituality that contemplative prayer opens us to. So I think it's a good idea to continue in a group, and then I guess at a particular point in time, it may be time to graduate. But I would say that most people that get involved and take up the practice of centering prayer are very supported and very encouraged and want to attend their weekly prayer group. There are very few that don't. And those that don't, because they don't have one nearby, really miss the opportunity of being with others, like-minded people. So if you have a group near you, I would encourage you to go. And it's nice to share watching the videotapes of the spiritual journey together and talk about them and begin to really break it open and understand it, because you can't understand it by just sitting there and listening to it for the first time. Often when people share their own experience of or their understanding of what they're hearing or listening to, it opens up a little part in other people, and they kind of get a common understanding. So I think it's very useful for people. And if they have it, I would encourage you to go.
I might just add, for the sake of completion, that if a parish that was the original idea, has a prayer group, it would influence the parish over time. Subtly, you wouldn't find everybody interested, but if you had 6 to a dozen people who were meeting, it might provide the contemplative dimension for a very active or socially minded parish that is important for those works of mercy to be done well and to persevere in them. If you undertake too much active ministry without the resources to sustain it, you are liable to get drained. And so the more active your life or your ministry is, the more you need time, and hence the more you need the resources of a group to sustain you, and the challenges of friends to encourage you. Just think of how much the group means to AA people. It's crucial for AA people. It's very high on the agenda because these folks need to hear day after day. They meet often 3 or 4 or more times a week. But it's part of their recovery is in belonging to a group. Now, their level of honesty is usually a lot more concrete and deeper and more honest than the average prayer group, because we don't have that experience of unmanageability that the AA people have in virtue of their affliction. But there's a great power in the community when the sharing is fairly deep. Now, we don't want our support groups to become group therapy. We're not qualified to guide such groups. But to have a little sharing once a month or more often, depending on what the group wants, brings the focus of the false self. And honesty helps us to be honest about our own failures to face our self-centeredness by hearing others acknowledge their failures in that regard. And so I think what helps AA people is to hear the constant repetition of the utmost human misery day after day, day after, because that's what makes them feel at home and gives them some hope. So if you keep in mind that if you understand what I've suggested is the meaning of the false self, we are all in recovery. That is to say, anybody with a false self, which is everybody, is on the road to getting an addiction, because the very process is addictive. And if your pain and displeasure with yourself gets more bad enough, then you get an addiction as a means of running away from the pain. So it's probable that to have a group or a guide when you're in the dark nights, which may be a large part of the spiritual journey, is a very significant support system. If you hear others going through the similar growing pains of the spiritual life, such as the absence of God, the unbearable quality of distractions and thoughts, the external difficulties that God allows to happen to us in order to point out our attachments that are hindering our progress. So you need a kind of circle. I'd like to change the name of the support group to the Circle of Silence. How does that sound? The Circle of Silence moves you beyond a kind of lovey-dovey, backpacking, Rotary Club style centering prayer group, and puts you right in the center of the circle where the action is, which is in silence, shared together. And shared silence is certainly more powerful than privately, though both experiences are useful. So that's an exploration of that question.
You always come up with a change of name. I like that. And now we're moving into the questions regarding the false self and purification. It seems that I tend to receive gentle showings, quote unquote, of my dark or false self after prayer time. Does this ever stop? Will I ever receive love and or support?
Well, that is love and support. What else do you want to know but the truth about yourselves? I think that to expect that is not a bad idea. Not to be, you can say, don't I have enough troubles in my life without having more by doing centering prayer? Not the right question. That's a bit superficial. Do the centering prayer and your problems will gradually diminish or cease. Or if they do not, your attitude towards the problems will change so that they become values rather than obstacles. Suffering is not something to cultivate, but it's the greatest teacher there is, if you can accept it. And so to be served after every period of centering prayer by a menu of your faults and self-centered activity is an immense blessing, more useful than consolations. It really is. You'll never get anywhere with consolations. But if you let God take your faults away, the condition is that you see them and accept them, acknowledge them, and give them to God. It's so easy. That's all we have to do. Acknowledge the truth about ourselves and our mixed motivation and give our faults to God. It's like a bouquet of roses. He has a strange kind of set of preferences. But we mustn't think that God doesn't want to hear about our faults, because the more of them you have, the more he loves you, okay? And the more he wants to heal you. I mean, I can't tell you why it works this way. But it seems to me the whole project of God's creation is to identify with our powerlessness or weakness in practicing virtue and in being a fully integrated human being. We can't do it by ourselves. Can't be done. It's a gift, and yet it's totally in God's plan to heal our wounds. And so much for that question.
Dear Father Thomas, I get very depressed over the fact that this journey is made over a lifetime. I don't like showing up in the world un-Christ-like. Is there any way to speed up the process?
Well, you might think of how much God loves you and how much he enjoys these descriptions that you're offering of your afflictions. Don't you? It's our insignificance and littleness that attracts God, and so it's so beautiful to be able to accept one's weakness without being discouraged. So if this questioner could just accept the situation just as it is, and the displeasure that he or she has with herself, you would make an enormous amount of progress in a short time. And since that's what you're interested in, you might think of trying it. You might try it. This is not just my doctrine, but this is the teaching of the great doctor of the church, Saint Therese of Lisieux. She's one of the two women who's a doctor of the church. So she had this great penetration into the gospel and is, to my mind at least, largely responsible for the contemplative renewal of the Roman Catholic Church, at least. In the Episcopal Communion, the writing of what's her name? Yes, Evelyn Underhill is without question one of the best books on general introduction to mysticism, with a very fine insight. And there are others in other traditions, but we'll take the next question, please.
Could you speak about the gift of tears? How does one distinguish unloading and depression during the unraveling of the false self? It can be hard to tell. The gift of tears and the unloading and depression, and whether, during the unraveling of the false self, it's hard to tell what's going on.
Well, the tears that come from the unloading of the unconscious are usually spontaneous. You don't have much choice. And often the unloading begins with grief, and grief is associated with tears, of course, because most people in our Western culture never have time to grieve adequately over the things that they have lost, including loved ones. You have to go back to work in a few days. So maybe they overdid it in times past where they would have widow's weeds, meaning clothes, and they would maybe spend a few months before going back to what that was a different culture, no longer exists. But the grief still exists, and the normal process is to allow oneself to mourn without guilt feelings or without repressing or suppressing the emotions, so that weeping is the normal way to do that, along with other things, of course, so that the tears that are a gift, everything in a sense is a gift, but the tears that the liturgy celebrates and has asked for with a liturgical prayer is really the gifts of joy, mostly. The joy of feeling repentant, of feeling really sorry for having done something that was troubled our conscience and so on. So it's a healing balm, and neither tears should be repressed. The tears that occur sometimes during an intensive retreat that has a lot of silence, not necessarily all silence, is that it accumulates the silence in your psyche somehow, so that the defense mechanisms relax. And as your trust in God increases and your humility increases, so that you're not afraid to face the shadow side or the dark side as an essential means of progress and of transformation, then the tears are not certainly not painful. They're a great relief, and they complete the work of grief if they're from the unloading, and if they're tears of joy, well, they're delightful. Some experiences of God or the presence of God are so moving, so touching, so profound. There is no response that you can give except sort of gently to weep. And so it's not helpful if people think that we're discouraged or something and tell us, there now, don't cry. That's what you most need to do. So if you see somebody crying in the circle of silence, you should applaud. Privately, of course, because it might not be understood. Yeah. Yes, silent applause. No, it's wonderful to see people relieved where they have an insight into something they've terribly painful to their childhood that has been repressed for 30 years or something. And finally they have the courage to face it. And it looks painful, but it's the pain that is on the way out and relieving the blockage of emotional bondage to some experience that was has exercised a kind of tyranny over their emotional life for years. Okay.
How do I know when God is speaking to me rather than I speaking to him or her for myself? In other words, how do I know it's God speaking to me, or am I just speaking to myself in impersonating God?
Well, one way would be by the results. If you're speaking to yourself, you're probably in worse shape than when you started out. If God is speaking to you, then you feel reassured and you feel inspired and you feel you have the strength to go on. God does not normally speak in words. Once in a while he does, but then you have the risk of your own cultural background or personal history influencing the meaning of the words. And in a word of wisdom that occurs sometimes when some spiritual person says something, you don't understand what they really mean for another 10 or 20 years. I've had that experience. I have, certainly. When I heard something that usually it brings you a certain peace of mind, and it could be a joke or just a casual remark, but it also can be something you read or something you heard in scripture or in a person. But it has a certain effect that you feel that God has meant this for you or has spoken to you through this person or this sentence or this idea. But you don't necessarily get the whole point until later. For instance, if some mystics have been told that they would die a martyr. So this one person was lying on her deathbed and she felt disappointed. She was obviously going to die in bed. And she complained to the Lord, I thought I was going to be a martyr. Well, he didn't answer that question because it was a stupid question. It didn't deserve it. Obviously, what he meant was that she would die with the merit of a martyr through her great love. So I think she almost lost it with her distress at not getting what she expected. It's the open mind, open heart means no fixed point of reference and a willingness to ever see deeper depths, both in your faith, in your hope, in your love, and in your understanding of events that were very meaningful for you, but don't necessarily mean you've plumbed the full depths of the gift of God until you've climbed up and opened your third eye of faith and other things. And then everything seems to fall in place without giving you absolute assurance. In this life, I don't think there is such a thing as certitude, absolute certainty. Only God is absolute. So you may have some doubts about things or about what you understood, but that doesn't mean that they were wrong. It just means that in this life, confusion is part of the human condition, and once in a while you can be very confused, but this is the time to multiply your trust in God and say, frankly, I don't know what to do. I'm completely confused, and everything I learned is worthless. And those stupid books by Thomas Keating caused me no end of trouble. Would that he had stayed in the monastery. When in actual fact, you don't need to know if you trust God. Because the certitude we're looking for is sometimes, and here's where the false self is so subtle, is really a desire for security in the infantile sense of the word. I want to be sure I'm on the right track. I want to be sure I'm in the right Christian denomination. I want to be sure I'm in the right religion. I want to be sure of something. Nobody's asking you to be sure of anything except that God is God and that he loves you and that he wants you to be supremely happy. And one of those things is not to demand certitude. As much conviction, which is a different thing, because that enables you to function. So you do what you're doing, putting your hope in God, sometimes without being certain. Okay.
I have an example of that, I think. I received a phone call, and it was very frightening to me, and I got very frightened at what I heard, the news I was hearing. And I stopped, and I hung up, I was finished with my conversation, and then I went back, and I opened a book that was the Daily Reader, actually, and I opened the Daily Reader, and the first words that I read were, "Fear not, trust in the Lord." So I felt that was God speaking to me. I just felt immediately, oh, okay. And I felt relieved, and I felt completely assured that I didn't have to be afraid. And I felt that's the way God spoke to me, by that particular piece of scripture to show up at that exact moment when I was trembling with fear. So I think that's the way God speaks, at least in that particular incident. So I would imagine it does in different ways.
Yes, I encourage you to think very broadly and openly of how much God not only wants to work in your life in all its details, but actually does. He's very self-effacing, it seems, and hidden. He's a hidden God. But God sees perfectly clearly the things that are hindering our self-surrender and progress. And he waits for just the right moment. Or if you're in a crisis, he does something like Gail was saying. You may be totally discouraged, and all of a sudden you see a dog wagging its tail. This is God saying, lighten up. It's not as bad as you think. And so in tiny ways, and this is what the fruits of the Spirit do, they make you sensitive to seeing the divine action in things. And it's not ridiculous to think when you're looking for a parking space you desperately need and one shows up somewhere. It's not by chance. To ask God for help in the details of life is very pleasing to God. And it is not superstitious. You can't really exaggerate it, because if God has this, if you accept even remotely that God has this enormous plan of transformation, it means that he wants to be our companion in everything that you do. So whether it's brushing your teeth, getting in and out of bed, or calling somebody on the phone. How else can you stand a busy life? How can you actually endure a cell phone, for instance, that is intruding into your life day and night, unless you think that every time the phone rings, it's really God is calling, and therefore you don't have to see it as an intrusion. I haven't reached that degree of virtue. And that's why I don't have a cell phone. or an internet or an email. I don't have that virtue yet. I still have a few days left to improve, I hope, maybe. But the sweetness of God, His closeness, you cannot exaggerate it. Try it out. Talk to Him about everything that bothers you, and if you have the time. And at the same time, realizing that you don't have to talk to God to be in God's presence all the time. You don't have to make up stuff. You say what's on your mind and then you drop it. But I'm sure many of you already have that experience of communing with the ground of your being, with the divine indwelling within. And it grows on you. And so in our world, which is so fast-paced and so intrusive from the point of view of the media and information explosion, and puts us in contact with the tragedies all over the world, what do you do with that stuff that you hear on the news all the time? It must be doing a job on us in some way. Our nervous system is never more exposed to instant tragedy everywhere in the world as it is in our time. So don't you think that God has figured out a remedy for this situation? And it's in staying in the presence of God spontaneously and simply, and telling Him what your troubles are or how exasperated you are. It will help to accept the inevitable ups and downs of everyday life. And it's precisely those ups and downs that point to the genuineness or the depths of your contemplative prayer. Because they show you who you really are. So that if you're very ecstatic in prayer and yet you're losing patience every time the phone rings or the meat is burnt or something, you better increase the time of your centering prayer. You need a little more help than you're getting. Is there any more questions?
Well, there are a few more questions, but we don't have any more time.
Oh, we're at the end of the day.
We're at the
Well,
end of the
thank you
day.
so much for joining us again. And my presence here is virtually miraculous from several points of view, as I've never seen so much snow in Aspen, and it was snowing when I got up and went to the airport at 5:30 in the morning. I never thought this plane would get out, and I'm not sure it was a good idea, but it left. So I attribute that to the prayers of those who knew about this. But I really would have liked to stay home. I really said, I'm too old for this kind of battling of the elements. But that's where I just got in the car and we went off, and the plane went off, and I went off, and here I am. So, yes, well, I'm reluctant to say goodbye. Thank you. There you are. Thank you. So, to God belongs all the applause, of course, so let's stand and I'll offer a blessing. Give you thanks, Almighty God, for all the gifts that you've given us, especially the gift of yourself. May our lives be refreshed by this day, and may we increase our love of you in each passing moment. May your blessing, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, rest upon us and remain with us always. Amen.